It's Friday, Feedback Friday, the feedbackiest day of the week. Ha! It's Feedback Friday, and as you can see, I've changed the position of the webcam, so there's a lot less floor in the background. I think I might like it better. Do you guys like it better? If you guys like it better, then I'll just shift the shelf of awesome behind me over some, which I was eventually going to do anyway, because I want to put like other shelves on either side of it. I want this whole wall behind me to kind of be shelves of some kind, because I need the storage for books and video games and stuff like that, and the tchotchkes that I love so much. And people like the little things in the background. Somebody mentioned the Iron Giant last week and stuff like that. So I kind of like giving people stuff to look at. But yeah, I think this shot works better. I was going for depth on the other one, but it was just like way too tall. I hate those. They remind me of those cam shots where people have their chin way out and they're trying to make the camera take off like 30 pounds. I always find it a little too diminutive for my content. So if we like this better, and I'm shooting during the day so I don't look like a vampire, that's what it is. I need more light in the background somehow. Again, something I have to fix for shooting at night. Now when there's daylight coming in the window, it's even enough. But that's just some technical stuff. Housekeeping again, help support this channel, become a monthly patron, patreon.com/Leanna K, or use the PayPal, the email address in the description box below on PayPal if you're going to do one-time donation. Your donations are greatly appreciated because all those people who left Patreon in a huff and said that if there was another form of payment that they could use to support me, they would. Maybe 2 of them out of the 24 that dropped have done it. So I am officially calling those people out on their hypocrisy. They do have another form of payment. They have not used it yet. That's not cool if your issue is with Patreon and not me. And being consistent and being non-hypocritical has kind of been the theme for the content this week. The patrons got a more behind the scenes story. The person who's the focus of the story, I didn't name names or anything like that, but they said that I could share the story publicly. I chose not to because it was just too personal. It was a response to the video I did on the APA therapeutic practice guidelines for men and boys. This is one of these things, it's a really humbling and kind of cool part of this job as a YouTuber. Whenever I do something on therapy for men and boys, I always get a couple of people sharing really heavy personal stuff. And I'm really humbled by that. We talked among the patrons about how to sort of expand support structures for people who do reach out, because that's heavy. I mean, I'm not sure the people who do it recognize how brave they are to reach out. They probably don't feel brave at the time, and that's why I'm saying, you guys who share your personal stories, that is very brave, especially in the era of distrust that we live in right now. Sharing your personal stories with somebody is, we talked about strength and we talked about bravery and things like that. That is an extremely brave thing to do. And I think people don't get enough credit for doing things like that because we have this really cartoonish idea of what strength and bravery look like. But that's freaking hard, man. And I'm glad that we have a community here where people feel comfortable doing that. I'm glad there are the channels where people can do it privately and discreetly. So that's really good. I mean, if I can help people access services or even just feel better about their lives, albeit temporarily, that's extremely important to me. I mean, yeah, financially earning a living is important too, but there are easier ways to do that than this. That kind of gamers helping gamers thing, that's the stuff I live for. Like, that's the stuff that keeps me going and stops me from figuring out something else to do with my life. Cause, that's something, man. And, I think the reason that APA document touched so many nerves, now part of it, and I think this is completely the fault of the way the APA document was written, because the media sensationalized the worst parts of it and didn't play up the better parts of it. And so most people are not going to take the time to read all 36 pages of the APA document, with its dry, circular, inconsistent prose. And so they just decide, the psychiatric industry hates them as men. And one of my big pet peeves about psychiatry, psychology, all that stuff is that it's unfortunately not as consistent as everybody would like. There can be the best practices in the world, but if you get a crappy therapist and they are out there and there is not enough oversight of people who treat people psychologically, people with mental illnesses are extremely vulnerable. And one of the vulnerabilities is that people don't tend to believe them when they have issues, which is something that bugs me. Just because you're depressed or have an anxiety condition doesn't mean you don't know how to tell the truth. People sort of dismiss everyone with a mental illness to an extent as being unreliable, and that's just not so. But also, even if a therapist, there's nothing wrong with them, they're just the wrong fit for somebody, that is an exhausting, a time-consuming, an expensive, debilitating, discouraging process, and a lot of people just give up. And I really think that's got to get better, that there should be more, doctors themselves should be working more collaboratively. So, I'm a big fan of health teams, so that the doctors at a clinic are on salary, and so there's no financial incentive to keep going on something that may not be your expertise. You don't make any more money based on having more patients. So, if somebody is not aligned with your specialty, you can say, how would you feel about speaking to my colleague? They are a specialist in, XYZ. They might be a better fit for you, and having the therapist take that step. I think that's really important, because quite frankly, and this is to people, if you are in therapy and by about the third session, you don't feel like it's helping you, I know they tell you it takes time, but going 6 months without help, that's too long. If a therapist should be giving you stuff to work on after a couple of sessions, they are not there just to listen to you talk and go, and too many of them do that. And I used to work with a guy who was a specialist in men's psychology, because he had a breakdown at middle age connected to childhood abuse, and he believed very strongly. His name's Dale Curd. He believed very strongly that part of the problem was that all rites of passage, but masculine rites of passage have been demolished with nothing to replace them, and so the sort of multi-step program that teaches people how to be men, how to navigate society's expectations and feel like they know what they're doing, society is failing people in that regard. And so he sort of works to rebuild things like healthy anger and not letting emotions overwhelm you. And man, as an introvert, something I really had to work on is not letting emotions overwhelm you, because, we tend to bottle stuff up And nobody sees it when it's this big because we keep it to ourselves. We're introverted, right? We keep our own counsel. So the first time anybody knows something's wrong is when it's already bah! And that can be scary for other people. It doesn't make it less legitimate, but then you get told you're overreacting, which really isn't fair. You're not overreacting. You're just not drama-llamaing at the slightest thing, right? It's different. It's not better. It's not worse. It's just different. And the world needs to get better at including introverts in that way. We don't talk about everything that's going on with us, usually because nobody freaking asks. And one of the most annoying things about society for me is that, when someone says, how are you? The expectation is you say, oh, I'm good or I'm okay, even if you're not. If I'm doing crappy, I say so. A lot of people don't like that, but I think that's more honest. I am not doing well. Don't push me today. Fair warning. I think that's more mature than pretending and then just biting someone's head off and they have no idea why you're losing it. But that's just me. Yeah, obviously something I feel really strong about. I'm a systems person. I'm an INTJ. I come by this honestly. I am all about getting the best result. And that kind of segues into, and I'm not going to go on more and more about the APA thing because I really made that video so guys could talk in the comments. And as far as I can say, anything in the comments is valid. Even the people who blame feminism, whatever, you're ranting. Don't blame me for things other people did, but, you're just venting, whatever, fine. I don't want to spend too much time on this because I don't want anyone to feel like I'm telling them how to be male or what the masculine experience is. I see that done. I will say I see that done. I read a horrendous story about a Blizzard employee that had his mental health severely compromised because a woman in his sort of pod of workers determined that, he must be sexist because he's Mexican, according to him. It was a horrible story. Part of me hopes it's not true. Part of me, a bigger part, has a really horrible feeling that it is. The account has a ring of truth to it. And I wish that former employee the best. It sounds just terrible, and it sounds like, it sounds like they didn't have an HR department at first, or an anemic HR department, and that really matters. I really do believe that a lot of HR things are not about somebody getting fired. It should be about, let's sit down and talk about this and work out the misunderstandings and figure out how to work better together. Humans are a resource. That's why it's called human resources. And, one of my big concerns is the general turnover in tech in general. And they see that as a good thing. And it's not. When someone being at your company for 4 years is considered a long time because the average rate of employment is 19 months, which is what Silicon Valley is, you got a problem across your sector. And gaming, it's longer, but it varies wildly from company to company. I know people who are at Ubisoft who have been there for years. I see them over and over and over again. Other people, I see them bouncing around from studio to studio because they have to. It tells you something about the various companies, not that they're perfect, but when you have that long time employee retention, when people feel like they can still be creative and a company is reactive to its employees' needs, you see that in people staying with the company a long time. That's a really important benchmark. I want to move on to the whole Ellie thing, the comments from that. A lot of agreement, which kind of surprised me because I took some pretty big swings. But it keeps coming up, this thing about, and you guys know I agree with you on this, that why should I support you through, allowing you to display ads. Why should I support you? By vouching for your service, by, by recommending your service to my friends, if you keep calling me an entitled fanboy crybaby and things like that. And I can't think of any other industry that is trying to sell stuff that insults the fan base. You don't see automotive magazines going, here's all the ways cars are destroying the environment. You don't see that, there's a lot of industries that do a lot more direct harm to humanity than gaming. I don't think gaming actually does very much direct harm to humanity, except for certain company employee practices. But, cars or heavy industry or something like that, they don't focus on the ways they're destroying the planet. They focus on what they're good at. They let their critics focus on the bad they're doing. And I do understand it, and I don't understand it, why the games press keeps doing this. The games press is desperate for legitimacy, and they desperately would like to be writing for something more prestigious than Kotaku, because Kotaku, I don't know if they're still doing it. For a while there, they were doing sharing with the New York Times. Like the New York Times was acquiring certain Kotaku content. And like all of a sudden that lifts the profile because they can say they were in the New York Times instead of Kotaku. And obviously a lot more people know who that is. The thing is, within the industry, that doesn't mean anything. But that's a security thing, right? Like that's someone feeling secure in of themselves. I am known in my industry, and my integrity and my reputation are good within my industry. What the rest of the world thinks, I don't really care. What matters to me is what my peers think. But that's not the thinking in games. That they want to be writers, or they want the prestige, and being a writer is not a great way to get prestige. I mean, for all the, big names, all the household names, there's millions that don't become household names, especially in news. It's a real pyramid. It's a pyramid iceberg. Most of it's under the water. Someone asked me about that Forbes article. They asked me, they described it as, I'll just read the whole comment. Here is something I gotta ask you, Leanna. Could you not say by the fact that the game wannabe journalists wanted and wished and then did everything in their power to push the, look here, a female gamer we can use to bash gamers for the fun of it, and then find out that she was in fact a guy, that in and of itself proved every gamer point of view on the journalists. Gamers to journalists, you claim to do your investigations and you could not find out that she was in fact he. So why should we gamers trust you guys and gals at all? Let's not forget for a single moment that we gamers remember how fast you have been to toss us under the bus. So blank you and have a nice day. That's not how the people that write these articles think. And you'll be going, what? I've talked to them. Okay. And yes, this is activist journalism. I don't deny that for a second, but they really believe that they want to do good with what they're doing, and that they think the way they can do good is by protecting the women's. And that's why I push the education on benevolent sexism so hard, because it's not helping. One commenter said they don't think it's benevolent at all. You're right. I hate the term. But that's the technical term. That is the, one angle of the ambivalent sexism index. I didn't come up with it. I'm stuck with it. I keep trying to think of a better way to say it, and I really can't, because the whole idea is it seems cuddly. It seems beneficial. It seems positive, and it's not. It's like benevolent dictatorship. There's nothing benevolent about a dictatorship. It's a myth. It's a mirage. And that's the big problem with these protect the women's narratives. We are so afraid of treating women in gaming as whole people, which means, and I shouldn't say all women, because I don't get these protections, and in a way I'm very happy for it. When I make a mistake, people yell at me for it. And I'd prefer that than people saying nothing just because I'm female. And unfortunately, too often when I was younger, that happened. They didn't correct me. And so the first time I knew I was doing a bad job is when they were getting rid of me. And it usually wasn't for anything I'd done. It was that they thought I was basically too aggressive in gaming. I was too aggressive. And they don't actually fire you. They just don't give you assignments. They make you so miserable, so you leave. But there was no feedback. There was no, look, we need you to do this a little bit differently, or can we talk about this? What's going on here? No, it's people who are in management that aren't good at management, and they're not sent to any training to make them better as managers. And so there's just this persistent cycle of everybody trying to cover their ass. And one thing that seems to be fairly safe within, game journalist circles is this woman as victim narrative, because it makes them feel like knights in shining armor, and it doesn't disrupt the status quo at all. As long as they keep women down, some dynamic woman is not going to come along competing for that job that fewer and fewer of them pay a living wage. I can't help but believe that that's part of the dynamic. Just saying. I see it. I see them go from, oh, we care so much, to getting extremely threatened the minute you come at them as a colleague, as a peer. The whole dynamic shifts. And the unfortunate thing about a lot of things being done remotely and email and everything like that is people can take shots at your work, and then an editor will pass it along to an anonymous comment. And when you go, who said that? Don't you want feedback? Are you resistant to feedback? It's like, no, I want to contextualize the feedback based on who said it. Because if it's somebody who doesn't know shit from Shinola, I don't think it's actually valid criticism. If it's somebody who's the top of their game, sure, I'm going to listen to that, right? And that kind of brings me to the third video I did this week, the first in the free speech series, which was kind of low rated compared to the others. It did less than half the traffic of the Ellie video. At the time of this recording, it's running neck and neck with the APA video, and that was up for a day less. So that's really interesting. Like, maybe the loudness of the comments is not, representative of what people who watch this channel as a whole are actually interested in. And, that's why we do these things. Interesting learning. I'm not sure yet. I'm not going to cut it short. I'm still going to do at least a couple more videos because I'm personally interested in this. I'm enjoying reading it. But I right now am looking something up because the thing that people took most issue with was the fact that I suggested that we test that the First Amendment is the best method of free speech, the best framework for free speech. And people translated that as, we don't know the First Amendment is the best until we try something else. That's not, and that's why I'm looking up what the actual wording was, because, it's not actually what I said. I didn't say try something else, switch to a different system, see how it goes. That wasn't what at least I was trying to say. I can't find the right wording here. I'm looking. It's not that let's try something else. Let's wipe out the First Amendment and try something else. It's, look, let's see where the weaknesses are in the First Amendment. Let's see if there are other systems, hello Momo, other countries around the world that are doing it better. Maybe we can adopt, because don't forget the First Amendment is an amendment to the Constitution. It can be changed. And the thing that disturbs me about the First Amendment is so much of its protections are not inherent to the language. It's through judicial interpretation. Now, personally, I'm sick of everything being decided through the courts. I'm sick of people not being able to just be decent to each other, listen to each other, and just be cool to each other, and everything has to end up in a court battle. And if you're not going to go to court over it, well, people can do whatever they want. That was never how the system was entitled to work. Courts are for when everything else fails. And I don't think every disagreement, especially when it comes to speech, should end up in court. I think that people should talk to each other, ironically enough, and work it out, because court is expensive and no one's happy. And all that a court can say is what the law says, not what decency or morality or ideals say. And somebody else, and this is one of these people who are constantly on me, claiming I don't believe in free speech, saying that the greatest civil rights advancements happened under, speech essentially freer than it is now. And that is just not true. Black people had their freedom of speech profoundly infringed during Jim Crow in the South, during the Civil Rights era. They did not have the platform. Ida B. Wells and the Black Press is something I've been reading about. It was really hard. And I don't think press should be divided along racial lines, but back then it was. So black people were reading the black press and white people were reading the white press, and that's no way to talk to each other. This goes back to what I said, is that we have been looking at free speech through a history of really imperfect models where someone is always getting the shaft. And we now exist in an era where corporations are considered people, and that means corporations get speech rights. And because we speak through, on the internet, a series of corporate environments, it's not a question of free speech, First Amendment protections, which only protect us from the government. We're living in a terms of service paradigm, and somebody asked me what I thought about terms of service. I used to do convention running. I used to do event running, and my codes of conduct, we used to joke, obey the cock, because it was COC, until people got offended and we had to stop doing it because it was just too much shrieking. We thought it was funny. Our codes of conduct looked completely different than these extremely vague codes of conduct that reference things not exclusive to, or here's some examples of things, but they can be other things. I wish they just, if it is just, company discretion, I wish they'd just come out and say that. Because, yeah, online terms of service right now are nearly impossible to interpret. And they just seem to me like patchworks based on, we don't want to get in trouble. We don't want to get shut down by the government. We don't want to get sued. I know there's a lot of scrambling because of FOSTA and COPA and all that stuff and a whole bunch of other acronym laws. Because it's so time consuming to redo codes of conduct, they tend to get messy after 3 or 4 revisions. I get an extent that is nature of the beast, but yeah, these things are a mess. And unfortunately, then you get the commentary, then you get the interpretation. For instance, the whole Patreon scandal that it inspired this whole, the free speech series of videos. people weren't upset based on what Patreon's code of conduct said. It turned out people were upset because of comments the CEO made. And how do I not possibly know about this? I know nothing, because I didn't reference something the CEO said. And, you know, based on my experience, CEOs can say anything they want. If it's not in the code of conduct, it's not binding. You know, you can't cite something the CEO said because there's no guarantee your users saw it. The users don't agree to what a CEO says when they sign up for Patreon or Twitter or Facebook or any other service. They sign up to obey the code of conduct or the user guidelines or the community standards or whatever euphemism they call it for, the rules. That's what matters. A CEO popping off about something that may or may not be policy is not binding. And it's a little frustrating that this becomes more important than what their actual rules say. And maybe this is because I am a systemized person and not, you know, an emotions first person. But I don't give a crap what a CEO says in a speech. That's a sales pitch. That's not your policy. I want to see on paper what your policy is, because that's enforceable. And so maybe the lesson in this whole thing is recognize that CEOs, when they make public statements like that, they are being salespeople, and you gotta read the fine print. That CEOs are one person on a board. The board is the body that actually matters. And I'm more than a little concerned about our speech being limited by a series of corporate fiefdoms on the internet. There are no public internet services. There are no public spaces online that actually are protected by the First Amendment. Everything is a term of service that overrides whatever government protections, because you're not agreeing to a deal with the government. You're agreeing to a deal with the company, in this case, YouTube, that you're watching this on. And that really concerns me, because that means, in terms of the pipelines where the bulk of us get our information from, it has nothing to do with government persecution. Companies are determining what we can and cannot say. And they have near unlimited protections. It's just, as long as their shareholders are happy, they keep going. We have no protection against Alphabet or against Facebook in terms of speech. And this is something we all have to be extremely aware of. We can scream about freedom of expression or First Amendment rights till the cows come home. First Amendment rights do not protect you from Facebook or Patreon or Twitter or YouTube. They protect you from the government. That's what the First Amendment says. And that's part of the reason why I'm like, whoa. The First Amendment is not the be all and the end all of free speech. There are other considerations, because the First Amendment is worded. That's why it's in the thumbnail for the video. Congress shall make no law. It has nothing to do with what a private company will let you say. And the structure of the US allowed the Citizens United decision to stand, which is terrible law. The idea that companies are people and money is speech and people can spend as much money as they want and that's an idea of free speech. No, that is undermining free and equal speech. That means that speech is only free for the rich and everybody else gets shouted down. I'm not okay with that. And that's why I think that we can't treat, and this is my final comment, I know I'm going a bit long, we cannot treat man-made laws, including constitutions, including amendments to those constitutions, as holy gospel. They are not. They are laws written by people, usually men, subject to scrutiny, subject to skepticism, subject to challenge. And I will never give up my right to skepticism. I'm Jewish, okay? I'm even allowed to argue with God. It's true. We don't have to agree with God. We just have to believe God exists. We can disagree with everything he's possibly done. There's certain stories in the Torah where they actually think that, no, God was challenging people to disagree with him. Like, I want you to sacrifice your son. Okay, God. Whoa, Abraham. What? Think for yourself, man. Oy. That's one interpretation of the binding of Isaac, and that's why it's called the binding of Isaac and not the sacrifice of Isaac, because God never wanted Abraham to go through with that. That's just one interpretation. But so I come from even a theological background of freaking question everything. Don't take anything on blind faith. You are talking about an amendment written long before mass communication, where the primary mass communication method was print, like the printing press, like mainly distributed locally. Everything had to be done by horse and buggy. There were no cars. We didn't have telecommunications. And the one thing I always notice about the First Amendment, it actually doesn't say freedom of religion and freedom from religion. It says, no, Congress shall make no law regarding the establishment of a religion or. And personally, I would like a little bit more clear wording than that. We have clear wording regarding religious protections in Canada. And people even push that. And you know, people are proud of the First Amendment. I get nationalistic pride. There's nothing wrong with that in reason. But this idea that, you know, in some countries, people are going to jail for making a joke. That is true in some countries that actually don't have free speech protections. Too many of these, I know we're accused of that in Canada, and it's not true. People get fined. People don't get sent to jail. I mean, even the Count Dankula thing in the in Scotland went the way I thought it did. I never thought they were going to send him to jail because it set a bad precedent based on a badly written law. He was fined. There's no jail time. He's even appealing that, but he's not going to jail for a video. Okay? He's not going to jail for a video. He's not. Stop saying that. In certain parts of the world, yes, people go to jail under ridiculous blasphemy laws that I completely disagree with. I do not think offense should only be limited to sexuality and God. I think that there are far more offensive things that human beings do to other people. And by offense, I mean offense against human dignity, not against sentiment, not against taste. I am not a fan of obscenity laws. I am not. I don't believe offense is an appropriate benchmark, an appropriate cutoff when it comes to free speech. Harm has to be the cutoff. But in America, First Amendment, offense is the cutoff. But it's only offensive if it's sex or excrement. And people argue me, oh, it hasn't been applied, it hasn't been applied. The point is, this is how the law was written. And I have an issue with that. Again, systems person. We are not safe based on judicial interpretation. We are not assured continued freedoms if we must rely on increasingly politicized court systems. Our laws have to be written in a way that protects us today. And I do really believe that the First Amendment needs a top-up. Just because of some of the stuff that is way too open to interpretation by the courts. Now, that doesn't mean anybody else is doing it any better, and perfect shouldn't be the enemy of the good. But I will never give up my right to ask questions and challenge things like that, because that's a central pillar of free speech. All right, guys, have a great weekend. I'll be back Monday in the snow. It's snowing again. I'm going to have to shovel again. Crap. Thanks for watching.